My name's Ethan, for those of you who I haven't had a chance to connect with yet. Hopefully some of you were able to make it to XeroCon last week. Both of your presenters today were there and potentially have come down with something that we caught while being there. So neither of us feeling 100%, but that's okay. We're going to charge on and talk about how you can identify and onboard your ideal clients. So from the looks of it, the content today has been fantastic. This session is focusing on how we can convert those leads that you've attracted and engaged based on the prior sessions to clients. And then we're going to drill into how you can sort of set expectations in your client relationships, manage scope, start to identify your ideal clients, and then effectively onboard them. So there's a lot to get through, and we might not get through all of it, but that's okay, because we'll be running more sessions in the future. So my fabulous co-host, Beck, thank you for joining us today. For those who haven't got a chance to connect with you yet, would you mind giving a bit of a brief introduction and background on why you're here talking to us today?
Thank you, Ethan. And yes, I am like you, a little bit under the weather today. And I think that's the new world order. You go to a big event and you get sick nowadays, but that's okay. It was great seeing everybody and some good stuff learned last week. So today I'm with you because I've been doing this for quite some time, identifying and onboarding my ideal clients. It's the joy of running my own practice as I get to pick the kind of people that I want to work with. And over the last my own practice, 8 years, and career of more than 20 years, I feel that I've really honed that system now and only work with good people. So ready to share that with everybody today.
Thanks, Beck. Unlike Beck, I don't get to pick the people who I work with, but fortunately they're all awesome anyway. For those who don't know about Ignition, we're a software company that's been around since 2013, and we were born out of an accounting practice who were looking to solve problems around that whole client onboarding workflow. So from signing the proposal and engagement letter through to completed payment and deploying work into your practice management system, we solve everything end to end for accounting and bookkeeping firms all over the world, which is great. So there's around 200 in our team. We're a global company with over 5,500 firms using the software now. So very exciting times, and personally head up partnerships for the business. So it's good to meet you all through the screen. I've already basically covered off in our agenda, so I'm going to motor through, given we've got a lot of content to talk about. But I wanted to start with, when we're talking about identifying and onboarding our ideal clients, how we can start off on the right foot. And we firmly believe that scope creep is one of the most important things to address upfront in your client engagement. And there are a couple of ways we can do that. So Beck, I guess given your experience in working with clients, give us a bit of a run through on the basics of scope creep. And maybe if you could call out a couple of the key areas where this starts to creep in our client relationships.
So scope creep happens in almost every service relationship that you have with clients, if that relationship is something that's ongoing and you're doing more than a one-off service, which in the accounting industry is incredibly common. Our clients always come back for additional services. Now, scope creep happens when we have engaged our clients for a particular set of work, let's say annual accounts, BASs, and things like that. And then there are ad hoc requests during the year for additional information or additional services that our clients need that weren't included in the engagement. And it also occurs when we've set down parameters of a job, but when we get in there, we realize maybe something's much bigger than we thought, or client affairs weren't up to date. Maybe their Xero file or MYB file wasn't fully reconciled the way they led us to believe. So the parameters of that job then changes mid-job. Now, all of these things are scope creep because they are outside the original scope of your engagement and probably weren't factored into your original version of pricing if you're doing upfront pricing with your clients.
Yeah, awesome. I just had to find the mute button there. That's great. And look, something that we know affects not only accounting and bookkeeping businesses, right? It's any business in professional services and not as well. We ran a bit of a survey just recently, actually a few months ago, almost 600 decision makers in accounting and bookkeeping firms across Australia. Now this is small to medium practices, so 1 to 50 employees. And on average, there was just under $104,000 worth of work that these firms were losing out on every year due to unrecovered out of scope work. So this proves why we think this is a big deal. This is a fair bit of cash that's sitting in lockup and that isn't being realized within your business. And so we think a huge part of onboarding clients and managing that process needs to start with addressing scope creep. So I might run through this. This is Beck's slide, but I'm going to talk to it anyway and claim it as my own. There are two ways of kind of dealing with this. The current process, which is, from what we see, jumping in and doing all of the work, taking on all of the responsibility without the protection that an engagement gives you, invoicing the client in arrears, and then hoping that they will pay you on time. So what we've seen is that this is relying on, and typically relying on out-of-date engagements, and assumes that there's going to be no hiccups, or as Beck said, assuming that the data is going to be in great condition when we receive it, and we're going to get things on time, which is often not the case. But we think there is a better way by getting engaged upfront with a proposal to help you specify the terms of your work, set out your fees, and remain compliant. This is a really proactive approach to your clients. What say the people? There's a couple of stats. I'm not going to linger too long on this, but from what we're seeing, a huge percentage of the accountants and bookkeepers that we surveyed delay awkward conversations to maintain long-standing client relationships. And this is something we want to touch on through this whole onboarding piece, is that if you set the right expectations up front, you don't have to have those awkward conversations down the line. And we can learn from some of Beck's experience in implementing this sort of process with all of her clients, which has had sort of tremendous results. I hope I'm not talking it up too much there, Beck. They have been tremendous. And scarily, 91% of the advisors commence work without a signed letter of engagement. That's crazy. I don't know why that is considered appropriate or okay. Most services you need to sign a contract for when you're getting work completed. You need to make sure that this is a part of your onboarding process. Beck, before we move on, anything to add there? Do these stats surprise you in any way?
They don't surprise me in any way, really. Even earlier on in my career and before having my own business, and at the beginning of my own business, I know engagements weren't front and center of what we did every single day. And that had terrible impact on the way that we actually operated the business. We didn't know what we had to do when we had to do it, and there was no clear definition around pricing either for our clients. The year that we implemented a more robust engagement strategy, our revenue increased nearly 20%, purely because we started charging for all the work that we were doing and having those awkward conversations with our clients up front, which actually made them not be as awkward in the long term, because you're getting all this out of the way before you move on with your client.
Awesome. No, I love it. So where to start? And this is, I guess, a higher level overview. There's probably a lot of text on this slide in hindsight. Beck, but talk us through, I guess, a couple of the key ways that we can start to take charge of this process. And, maybe with the lens of, these are obviously, you've got existing client base here. So how do we start to take charge of these relationships where we've got these long-standing inherited client relationships that we're dealing with?
The first thing that you need to consider when you're looking at taking charge of the process and making sure that you're the one that's managing your client relationship as opposed to being managed is actually managing the expectations. A lot of the awkward conversations that we have to have with clients occur because the expectations are not properly set between us and between our clients. And engagements are a perfect way to do that, because it will detail out everything that between you and your client need to know to go through that client relationship, and will also set a foundation of how scope creep will be managed. Controlling the work-in process is the next most important part, because this is all about you taking control of when the work for your client will get done, as opposed to having to jump every time they call or send you an email. You very clearly explain to them as part of the engagement process and onboarding process that these are the times of year that we will do certain work for you, and letting them know as well that we understand sometimes things come up, but this helps you also organize your capacity planning internally and give you the confidence to take on new clients or take on additional work, because you already know what your work plan is for that month and future months. And communication. No matter what you do with your clients, communicate with them early. If you're going to change a process or implement something new with them, make sure they know well in advance of any changes, so that a friction point or any questions can be addressed before these items occur.
Awesome. And that's fantastic. And look, we're going to go into 4 steps with a little bit more detail here that I'm not going to spend too much time on, but I am keen to just step through 4 things that we can address, or 4 key steps in this process of taking control. And then we're going to step into sort of the onboarding and engagement side of things as well. So having a robust engagements process is really clear. If Beck didn't explain it clearly enough just before, it helps you to clearly articulate the services you're providing, minimizing that risk of scope creep, minimizing disputes by dealing with the fee schedule upfront, so you can actually focus on the service and scoping out the service without worrying about getting paid. There's a lot of trust here, and from a regulatory perspective, you actually need to be engaging your clients each year to make sure that you are covered in the event of a dispute. And then again, including terms to vary your pricing in the event of, if there are any unforeseen circumstances or out of scope work that does occur, you need a basis to be able to go back to your clients and say, hey, this was the original scope, this is what you were paying, but now that's changed, and then here's the new fee schedule. This slide here, I guess, Beck, do you want to talk to just, helping the clients understand the value of your skills and time? Because again, this is something that often comes up when we're talking about onboarding and pricing and quoting new clients. And, a lot of people trying to work out what other firms are charging in the market for certain services. How did you guys approach that? And when did you get the confidence to sort of, start charging what you're worth, what your value is?
A lot of this process is also around understanding the cost of delivery in your business. So we have to pay our staff, we have to pay rent, and a whole range of other things. Now, those items have got absolutely nothing to do with how long a job takes, sometimes those additional items, but our staff costs are based on where they are at their level of qualification. And that's where you have to start to understand and be able to articulate your value around how many years it's taken you to actually have the qualification to do this. So be confident in the process of explaining to your clients that you can have either, a junior person who's maybe unqualified looking at their work with the risk of lots of things going wrong, and also that they probably aren't qualified enough to be able to lodge anything. Or you can have somebody who is paid well and has all these qualifications, but will charge a higher price. So these are the options when your clients are looking at effectively price shopping you against other people. If they are going to other organizations that are underpricing you, there might be a disparity between the quality of the service. Be confident in explaining to your clients why your service is better than potentially Joe down the road. You should also, going through this process when you're educating and retraining your clients, take that conversation away from the hours it takes to prepare your work to the value and what you're providing. So if you're providing annual accounts and tax returns, you're keeping them compliant, you're keeping them out of jail, you're making sure that everything in their business works. If you're doing cash flow forecasting, you're making sure that they stay liquid and solvent. So these are, don't just talk about the service, but explain what that service actually means. That's where you deliver the value. Also make sure that you are very clear in this part around your expectations of your client on supplying you accurate and up-to-date information at every point, because that will drive down the cost to you and to them of producing this work.
Love it. What a good question that's come in on the chat from Shannon. Thank you. Any suggestions on how to implement this, but delegate? This seems like just more that I have to do myself, and I'm trying to go the other way. Funnily enough, our next slide is on empowering your team. So, Beck, how did you delegate this amongst your team?
We couldn't outline that any better if we tried, Ethan. That was a perfectly timed question.
Fantastic.
So empowering your team, actually, a big driver behind being able to do that in my practice was the use of technology, and in particular Ignition when we're talking about the engagement piece. So it's all around making sure that once you have your clients engaged and using templated services, which we can go into in a little bit more detail later, means that you can get the information out, so that will reduce some of your time and get these services out. But having them saved in a piece of technology like Ignition and in the cloud, and giving your whole staff access, means every time a client rings and asks for additional work or emails, your team can very quickly access their engagement, make sure that the clients are engaged for that service. And if they're not, using a template, sending out something within a couple of minutes that's pre-approved because it's templated and pre-approved by the directors, and get the client engaged for that work. If you think about the services that we mostly provide, 90% of it can be templated, if not 95%. There will only be a few outliers where you'll actually have to contribute and tell your team what could possibly be different in that engagement. So this process and making us part of your team's KPIs and the culture means you're actually able to shift that responsibility off yourself and onto your team.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And look, I think, of course, there is software out there to help with this, but even just starting with, not even starting with the software, but starting with the process, right? To be able to say, transparently provide your sort of pricing framework to your team and give them confidence in talking to clients about their fees, and giving them confidence and visibility over what the clients are engaged for is a big part of that. We see a lot of firms coming on board where all of that information sits with the partner or sits with the director, and it's not transferred to the rest of the team. So the team are trying to help the client to the best of their ability, but little do they know the client is not aware that they're going to need to pay for that, and so it ends up getting written off and it's demotivating the team. So I think that transparency piece is really important, and probably something we need to further discuss. Is that there's going to be reluctance to be transparent around pricing and fees within a business, particularly of a certain size. So maybe that's a can of worms for another day. But Beck, you've put in this final slide here: don't break your own rules. And given the conversations I had last week at XeroCon, I don't know where you got this from. It seems like partners and directors are always following the rules, right? I mean, but I guess that you're trying to say that this is top down, right? We need to be living this culture throughout the firm.
Absolutely. It is always the directors and partners who break the rules, no matter what the people at XeroCon say. We set them, and then one of our mates will call us and ask for something, and we will bend. So we need to be the ones who don't do that, who set proper rules that are flowed through and lead by example. If you want to bring your team on the journey, then you have to be on the journey with them.
Awesome. I was totally joking about my comment earlier as well. And I think a crucial point here to call out is that, you can start with new clients and move to your older clients as well. So we're not just talking about blanket rolling out a new way of doing things. This is a prime process to put in place when you are onboarding those new clients, which is what this session is about: converting those prospects into clients. Speaking of that, we're going to talk about identifying, attracting, and engaging your ideal clients. And I think the reason why I've put this section in is that every single firm that we speak to at the moment is absolutely smashed. There is no capacity to think about growth. They are up to their eyeballs in client work and can't even think about growing the business because there's not enough capacity to get the current work done, let alone sort of take on new work. And I think at least in Australia, for the most part, there are just not enough accountants overall. So that's part of a bigger conversation, of course. But I think one of the cool things, Beck, that you've been able to do is get clear on who your ideal clients are, and then get really specific with who you're not wanting to work with, so that you are actually working with clients who are profitable, who value your work, and are a good fit for your business. So talk us through, I guess, a couple of your value drivers and how firms can start to think about this with regard to their ideal client.
So every firm is going to have a different way that they value their client, and it's going to be quite a few different factors that will impact that. And even inside a firm, different partners will have different clients that they prefer to work with. That might come down to a speciality. So for example, mine are in construction and hospitality and tech businesses is where I have my major focus. And I'm probably not going to take on a lot of clients outside of that because that's what I've decided I want to focus on. Interestingly enough, I only had a conversation last week with one of the directors in the business where we decided not to even quote a client because they did not fit our ideal client profile, even after being referred by somebody else. Now, the factors that might impact whether or not a client is valuable for you or how you rank your clients could be based on the financial value. Maybe you only want a certain dollar value coming into the business, the growth potential, or your specialization like I've focused on. And also client satisfaction becomes really important about whether or not a client is valuable in your firm. And we go through some of those value drivers in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So when you're looking at that financial value, that's not necessarily just the total revenue generated by each client, but should also factor in the profitability. Because as we know, a high revenue generating client, you could still be making losses on. So having a look at both the profits and the revenue driven by a client will help determine some of their value. Growth potential and specialization. We have probably two factors at Business Depot. A lot of the partners have a focus on particular specializations, and we all have differing ones. But as a whole, we're more inclined to take on clients that are going through a growth phase as opposed to those clients that are mature or declining. And then client satisfaction. Now that becomes really important because how your clients feel about you, and this is existing clients as well, not just new clients, will determine how easy it is to speak to them about your value and how many other clients they will refer you on to. And regardless of how much advertising that we do, which is fantastic, a good source of our revenue and client growth will always come from referrals. So having great referral clients in your client base is also incredibly important and is a great value driver.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Beck. To give your voice a break, I am going to talk through this slide. So this is something that was in our fixed fee playbook that Beck put together a couple of, might have been a year or two ago now, actually. So just, again, a common thing that comes up when we're talking about converting clients and engaging them and proposals and so on is pricing. And so what's really helpful is putting together a categorization tool and a pricing matrix to be able to group your clients into different buckets based off certain parameters around finance leases, number of employees, bank accounts, and so on. And then being able to align those to the different services that you're offering. So your annual accounts, so your BAS or your tax returns or so on. Being able to work out roughly what it will cost you to deliver those services to each of those different sizes of clients will give you that framework. And it gives you the ability to start building out your proposals in a way that is transparent. And I'll explain that in a couple of minutes when I go and show you what a proposal could look like within Ignition with regard to multiple tiers. Feels like a big tee up as well for what we're finally getting to with regard to converting, but bear with me. So being able to use this matrix to actually inform your base level prices and then being able to use those within your proposals. We have a lot of content that we've done previously around understanding your costs as well and sort of looking at your margins and things too. So we can potentially link that webinar recording if you're interested in that. So I guess finally, once we've done this categorization, the main point is that we can either be reactive and wait for new clients to be referred to us and just appear. But as you've heard today, we can be proactive in actively engaging and growing revenue with our ideal clients and targeting those new clients that sit within that ideal profile so we can build a better business. So we're going to finally start talking about converting clients, which is the sort of the main point of this session. Beck, how have you gone about, and I know that you use Ignition, so you might be a little bit biased here, but in terms of the actual conversion process, were there any big pillars that you implemented at Business Depot beyond just the use of Ignition, but the thinking behind your proposals to actually help convert clients that were coming in?
When we are bringing clients on board or converting them, we make sure that we're addressing not only the services that we're going to provide them now, but also let them know about any of the future opportunities. And we use options quite a lot in our proposals and engagements so that clients can understand the fuller realm of the items that we can work with them on. It is definitely a better tool to use for conversions and talking about that whole of business service approach, because it means that our clients, they might not take everything right now, but they know there's some great opportunities moving forward. So really explaining everything that your business can do for them, even if you're only going to kick off with one service, is always a really great way to get them over the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, just to be clear, on your actual engagement letter itself, you should be, and we'll show you what Beck's referring to in terms of options in a few minutes, but on your engagement letter, you should at least be including, or your proposal rather, all the services which you've agreed to provide to the client, how often those will be provided, who's going to be responsible for what, how you're going to charge for those services, all of your payment terms, how out of scope is going to be handled, and what is not included. And the last point is the most important because it then gives you the ability to go back and sort of sell more services to those clients as well if they do exceed the scope of that original engagement. And we just see quite often the firms doing more and more work for these clients, but not necessarily getting the recoverability on that work because they haven't gone back to the client to have that discussion about their fees and what they're charging. Payments is a big part of this as well. And we get a lot of questions around, how do we manage payments when we're onboarding and converting clients? I think for most accountants that we speak to, they just want to start doing the work. They're onboarding the client. It's kind of exciting. Get in, get the work done, and the payments are a bit of an afterthought. Or we rack up time on the job, and then someone does up the invoice and writes some of it off and sends to the client. There's no real process around chasing that payment, and as a result, you've got these big, these high sort of debtors that we see across plenty of firms. So Beck, what was your philosophy to payments? And presuming at some point you were doing the old way and you've converted now to payment up front, or at least getting payment details up front.
Yeah, I suppose I just got sick of not getting paid, which
Fair
is
enough.
a valid position for any business owner. We do great work. And what we started to do was actually, which I've noticed is a bit different to the way most people approach it. We started implementing a requirement for payment details actually on our smaller invoices to start off with, because the amount of time and money that was wasted chasing someone for a few $100s was infuriating. When we saw how well that worked with our client base and the way that they took it up, we've rolled it out now across all of our services and take payment details on almost every single one of our engagements now. And what that means is that we have the power around when we will get paid, and we still give our clients enough time between raising an invoice and taking their payment, if we're doing bill on completion work, that they can raise any queries on the job. But we are now confident that the work that we will do will always get paid. There's no more write-offs. There's no 60 days in lockup. Our debtor days are less than 7 days at the moment, which is well beneath our terms, which are 7 days.
Brilliant. Oh, that's awesome. I'm sure many firms would kill to be in that position. Look, during the survey that I keep referring to, 40% of the advisors we surveyed have invoices being paid late or after their due date. And I guess the key point is that we never want to be in a position where we're providing a service which isn't being paid for, or that we're not certain of getting recoverability on. And I think in this current environment, more than ever, where we've got a constraint on resources and rising costs to do business, we need to make sure that we've got those fees agreed to, so that we're not incurring these costs in time for a service business and not recovering on those fees. So whether it's using Ignition or not, the process or the philosophy around getting payment terms agreed to upfront is still consistent. One of the next points here, in terms of your conversion of clients and helping to engage them and sign them up, making sure that you do remain compliant with your obligations as tax and BAS agents. It's very clear in the guidance that's provided that you should be engaging your clients at least annually. And I think this will become more and more important as we progress toward doing more by way of client verification and identity and all this sort of stuff here in Australia. You guys have kind of done it more in New Zealand for those who are tuning in from across the ditch, but making sure that you're ticking this box. And one thing that we have done is been able to partner with some of the associations to bring in their engagement letter terms and templates into the app to help you do this. And if you are not using Ignition, or you're not wanting to use Ignition for the process, make sure you at least go onto your association's resources and get access to their templates so that you are compliant as well. Finally, and Beck, keen to get your insight on this a little bit with your sort of app tech stack, which we haven't spoken about for a little while. How the importance of having something that's integrated. And I think, again, one of the things we see is that there's no process around onboarding and converting clients. It's done off the cuff. It's done after a networking event. It's done after a long lunch. It's done, like at a friend's barbecue on the weekend where there's been a referral and you get a phone call and you start doing the work, but there's been no process to actually move that client through the funnel. How did you guys sort of develop that with an integrations mindset?
We when we look at our tech stack, we try to make sure that everything is connecting to our single source of truth. So for that, it is our tax software. Now, Ignition talks directly to that, and that software also powers our workflow. Excuse me. So what happens is we've got a client will accept an engagement. Now, one of the big things that can happen, particularly when you're engaging clients on the fly, is that you forget about the actual work and putting that workflow in place. The wonderful thing about the way we've set up our tech stack is that a client comes through, they accept their engagement. All the services are noted in our engagement, so that pushes straight through into our workflow. It also triggers some workflows if it's a new client to identify what needs to be onboarded and to start their data collection process. So our administrator will be notified and have a job assigned to her to make sure that she is sending out the ethical clearance letter to the old accountant, or collating any of the documents that we need, copies of prior financial returns, and entering them into our system if they're not already there. But and then all the team members, so accountants from our junior accountants up to our senior accountants, will have the appropriate workflows appear in their job management at the appropriate times, depending on the work that it is that we're doing. And then further to that, our payments process as well is integrated inside our own ledger, which means that we're taking payment, those invoices are being raised and reconciled automatically. This whole process is almost one person's full-time job in our firm that is now handled primarily by the technology, which is brilliant.
That's fantastic. We've had a question come through as well, like a bit of interest around payments in particular. And I think, Beck, you've said this before, but your clients respect the need to know cash flow and have a budget now more than ever. Did you get pushback from your clients when building in this sort of fee discussion into the actual conversion? I'm struggling to think of another word rather than conversion. What do you guys call it when you're bringing on a new client? Engagement? Onboarding. Did you guys get any pushback around pricing?
For some of the client, not with new clients, because we very firmly explained what our expectations are. So new clients are always the best way to test this out. For some of our older clients, if it was a big change, we had to talk them through it a little bit more. In the end, the clients that refused to give us their payment details are no longer our clients, because it turns out they were also the ones who were bad payers. We didn't want to work with them anyway.
Classic. There you go. That's great. Look, finally here, and look, as we start to wrap up, I will show quickly what we were talking about with regard to options in a few minutes. But the key point is that building in pricing into your onboarding or engagement, conversion, however you want to, the terminology you want to use, is going to save you hours in explaining your invoices after delivering the work. You don't want to be in a position where you're needing to justify costs on your invoice after you've completed that work for the client. And we have seen amazing results where firms have implemented this process and over a period of time have removed a huge amount of debtors just by reframing these conversations and setting these expectations up front in your onboarding process. So I guess some of the results here, Beck, you kind of put these together for your practice, but for the firms that are listening in today, any sort of key tips beyond what we've got on the screen with regard to that conversion piece? So earlier in the day, we're hearing about marketing and attracting clients using some marketing techniques. And, I think marketing can be a little bit of a dirty word at times. I know Business Depot do it really well with your content, webinars, and so on. But any sort of tips for those who are listening around actually moving those prospects through the funnel to convert them to new clients?
The biggest challenge that we will face once we've got a client interested is actually moving swiftly. We're quite notorious at moving slowly and not responding quick enough. So leveraging technology or whatever it is that you're going to use, template out your process, have it there so it's written and easily replicable, know exactly the steps that you need to do, make sure it's not all on you as the partner or director in the firm, that there are other people involved in this. If you can move swiftly while an opportunity is still hot and get the engagement out, get the client side and get them onboarded, that's the key to actually bringing that relationship and converting it into a long-lasting one, is move swiftly and professionally.
That's awesome. And then again, I think something you've talked about a lot is then once you've got that basis now with a solid engagement, every year it becomes like a new opportunity with that client, being able to sit down and do your reviews, being able to sit down and look at the last 12 months worth of work, see where we've met expectations, where we've not met expectations, adjust the fee if need be, offer them additional services if their circumstances have changed. It does give you that basis to go back to the client and have a structured conversation around that scope. So I think that's awesome. In my final couple of minutes, I did want to just demonstrate the use of options, if I can get my computer to work. So I'm going to demonstrate this using Ignition, but this is not something you have to use Ignition for. I'm just demonstrating the concept of presenting multiple tiers or multiple price points to a client. I think this is going to tie really well into some of the other content that you've heard today. Beck, I know this is something that you guys use in your practice, and it's something that we've seen a lot of firms start to do with regard to packaging up their offering for a particular client. I understand there's been a few firms that have come back and said, oh, I'm not confident enough in my pricing to be able to do this. I'll just do a bespoke quote for every client. What was your sort of journey to getting to the point where you can present these options, and have you seen a benefit from doing so beyond just doing a single quote for a client, for instance?
Being able to get to this point meant that we had to actually create our pricing matrix, which were our minimum pricing services for every service that we have across the firm, depending on the size of a client. So we've got 3 categories: generally, small, medium, large client, all of our services, and having an understanding of the pricing. Like I said before, 90 to 95% of your pricing will fall in there, because we are doing the same sort of work over and over and over again with our clients. Even the advisory pieces, there is some standardization across that. That then helped us build out our options. We have something very similar on the screen to what you've got up now with our clients, just named slightly different, something like keeping you compliant, or keeping you out of jail, and keeping you out of jail and understanding your cash. So a few different options, but it's definitely like this, where we've got that base, bare minimum service, a little bit more, and then the full blown.
Keeping you out of jail has been a recurring theme that you've mentioned on this webinar. Maybe that's the secret. Just threaten going to jail for non-compliance with the ATO. No, that's not a way you should be converting clients. Awesome. No, I think this is really key. And then being able to, again, have something that allows you to convey that value to your clients, get agreement up front, get payment details captured up front. Again, there is technology available to automate this process. It can be done manually. The concepts are still consistent. Use something to help you convey the value up front. Make sure you've got it agreed to in writing. Make sure you do it every year. Make sure you get payment schedules agreed to up front. And then, as Beck has said, jump on the opportunity while it's hot, and don't let those leads go cold. And I think that the process that you would have heard about earlier in the day around attracting clients and using some of those marketing strategies, this dovetails really well into the concepts that we've talked about today. And it's been a little bit of a windy road to get to this in terms of the content today. We've talked about a lot. We've talked about scope creep. We've talked a little bit about pricing. We've talked a little bit about converting clients. We've done a lot. If you want to learn more, then we're happy to share. We've got resources on all of those topics. So Anthea, back over to you, and thanks, Beck, for sharing your insight from your life in the trenches as an accountant.
Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you, both of you. Insightful was the word I was going to use as well. I've written notes myself, and obviously, particularly as a marketer and teaching accountants about marketing, all that stuff about communicating your value, it was particularly awesome to hear about as well. Staying out of jail and all that sort of stuff too, and keeping it away from your costs and that sort of stuff. But thank you so much, both of you, for your time. I'm just going to launch a poll in case anyone would like someone from Ignition to get in touch with you directly. Please hit yes to that, and they'll be in touch. Otherwise, is there a best place, Ethan, to just direct to your website to book a meeting or something like that? Or
Sure, yeah, and we're happy to send out a link in the email following. What I would be keen to send out as well is our playbook with some more detail around the pricing, the whole pricing categorization thing as well. I think that'll be a useful resource for everyone too. So we'll shoot you some links to send out.
Perfect. So we'll send a copy of the recording and those resources Ethan mentioned. Those that would like Ignition